He's an expert in government relations and obtaining permits. As a side note, he helped loads of doctors lease and own commercial real estate and help with their practice. He's past president of the Greater Waterbury Chamber of Commerce, a powerhouse with 1,300 members. He still serves on the board, very generous fellow. And many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, he saw all the industrial legacy properties around the state, and he decided to go into deep industrial knowledge and deep. We went deep, you get it? Yeah. No. DEEP. So without further ado, I give you my really smart friend, Gary B. O'Connor.
Yeah. And Tom, thanks for the plug, but before we start, we have our own shameless plug to give, and Josh Cole, my partner, is going to lead us off.
You know what, just before you start, let me just say that we're at the Fairfield County Commercial Brokers Network October meeting. This is our 26th year that we're wrapping up in December, okay? And I want to say that when we first started in 1999, 2000, I think by 2001, Pullman Comley had come to us and said that they would sponsor one of our first events. So I just want to say thank you for the long-term relationship that we've enjoyed. It's been great, and you guys have been terrific in sharing your information with everybody. Thank you.
Take that one so you can get it going.
Joining us. My name is Josh Cole. I'm the chair of our commercial finance practice group at Pullman and Comley. I just want to give you a little information about our firm. Our firm was founded 106 years ago in 1919 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We now have 89 attorneys spread throughout 6 offices: Westport, Bridgeport, Hartford, Springfield, Wakefield, Rhode Island, and White Plains, New York. We are a true full-service law firm. The breadth of our practice areas. When we work with our real estate clients, we're able to help them from the beginning of a transaction through the end. Starting with formation of corporate entities, due diligence, contract review, preparation, financing, and closing. And ultimately, when they're in their properties, we work with them on leasing. We have a great property valuations team that can help them look at their property taxes and see if they're being taxed fairly or if it's something that they should challenge. So I think that's one of the great strengths that we bring to the table for our clients, the ability to serve every need that they can have throughout the course of a transaction, and once they get their properties stabilized and operating. So with that, let me just give a quick brief introduction about my colleagues here on my left. We heard a little bit about Gary. Gary is the co-chair of our commercial real estate group. He has extensive experience in environmental conditions, has worked closely with Dept, EPA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, DECD, and he's negotiated many major federal and state grants and loan agreements for large-scale remediation and redevelopment projects, and has represented private developers in the acquisition, remediation, land use, permitting, and construction of many large commercial and residential projects throughout Connecticut, many of which are on former brownfield sites. He served as the state's risk-based remediation working group and has been co-chair of the General Assembly's Brownfield Working Group, which has helped develop most of the state's brownfield programs. We're also joined up here by Tyler Hokanson, counsel in our real estate group from our Hartford office. Tyler is a transactional real estate attorney, counseling clients on joint ventures, financings, purchase and sale of industrial, office, multifamily, and retail properties across the country. Throughout his career, Tyler has represented owners, investors, tenants, and developers in acquisitions, dispositions, development, financing, leasing, and management of all types of commercial real estate. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tyler, who's going to kick things off with Gary.
Thanks so much, Josh, for the introduction. We're very happy as a firm to be with you this afternoon to discuss something that will hopefully be of interest to the whole group here. We'll be talking about the sunsetting of the Transfer Act and the release space cleanup procedures that the state is implementing as of next year. So what we'd like to do for the next 20 or so minutes is to have a relatively high-level conversation about some of the high points that will be of interest. The new release-based program is pretty detailed, pretty vast. There are hundreds of pages of legislation and regulations. We're trying to hit on the points that will be most interesting to U.S. brokers and counseling to clients, and things to look out for in transactions. So I'll ask Gary a few questions. He'll respond. You may have questions of your own. We'll take questions at the end of the session. And then if you have any further specific questions you'd like to address with us, please feel free to come up and talk to us afterwards. So with that, I'll kick us off with our first question.
Okay.
So let's talk just generally, Gary, about the reasons for sunsetting the Transfer Act and adopting this new release-based program.
Let me stand up a little bit. I've been sitting all day. Thank you all for coming. This is a great crowd, and what an incredible venue we have here. So I was asked to, talk about the sunsetting of the Transfer Act, which I think many of you are delighted about. For years, the real estate and business community have been bemoaning the challenges associated with the Transfer Act and have sought very hard to get rid of that program. Many led the charge, including many members of the commercial real estate industry in Connecticut. So I thank you for your efforts in getting this over the goal line. And I just have a quick poll here, because I'm going to go into some of the challenges with the Transfer Act, but how many of you have had a deal in the last 10 years that's been killed because of the Transfer Act? Because of the Transfer Act, yeah, quite a few. I've had many, and it's frustrating. And if they weren't killed, they were delayed significantly. So we'll get to that challenge, but I just want to give you a brief background, and very brief because it's ending, so you don't need to know much about it now. But the Transfer Act was passed in 1985, and it doesn't apply to every property. This is the interesting thing. It only applies to properties that are considered establishments. And there's no connection between whether a release exists or whether it's an establishment. So that is one of the fundamental problems with the Transfer Act. But it applies to any property that ever operated a dry cleaner, an auto body dealership, furniture stripping, and probably most significantly, any property that ever accumulated, and it's supposedly in any 1 month, but DEP had interpreted it differently. Anyone who manifested out 100 kilograms or more of hazardous waste in any 1 month is really what it comes down to, because there are countless cases where people accumulated some, technically hazardous waste, solvents for cleaning over years, and then, and then dispose of it in one shot. And all of a sudden now they have establishment status. So the trigger for the Transfer Act is the transfer of the property. And as you all know, that is the bane to real estate transactions. I mean, because all of a sudden you have to deal with you're ready to close, buyer's anxious to close, seller's anxious to close, financing is there, may not be there forever. And all of a sudden the Transfer Act, raises its ugly head. And now there's delays. You have to hire an LEP, environmental lawyer, and all to prove a negative. And so, so that trigger of transfer of the property has been a real problem. Let me just say that I won't go into, I have a whole bunch of stuff here about what the obligations are, but you don't need to know those since we're getting rid of the program. The challenges, though, hold on 1 second. The challenges in the Transfer Act are many. One is it's ineffective. There's over 5,000 properties that are in the Transfer Act program, and yet over the years only 2,500 have successfully completed the program. And it only affects a small universe of commercial and industrial properties in the state. So it's in effect, CERC in a study estimated that if we didn't have the Transfer Act, there would be over 4,300 direct manufacturing jobs and an additional 113 million in additional net state revenue generated, but for the Transfer Act. And I think for me, the biggest problem is there's a fundamental unfairness to the program. Consider it. You can have clean operations, a state-of-the-art manufacturer that generates more than 100 kilograms of hazardous waste. Never had a release, but yet because it has that status, it now, when it sells the property, it has to go out and, as I said, hire all these consultants, which get very expensive, just to prove a negative. So, and I'm sure all of you have been in that situation. There's a shopping center that, decades ago leased a small space to a dry cleaner. Now, all of a sudden, when they transfer it, they have to go out and they have to comply with the Transfer Act. File the forms, investigate the entire site, not just the release, the entire site. And they may never be a release on that site, but that was the act. So, and then finally, we're one of only 2 states that had our remediation program based on transfers. So we're out of line with 48 states. So finally, and I'll remember this vividly because as the chair of the Brownfields working group, I wanted to carve out, for a lot of good reasons, the Brownfields program from the new program that was coming. But in September 2020, the legislature passed Public Act 20-09, which called for the sunsetting of the Transfer Act and the adoption of this new release-based program, without getting into our next question. And it was a bare bones statute. It was one of those things that literally, at midnight they're working on this and said, well, look we're gonna pass the skeleton, and then the meat will be put on the bone when we do the regulations. And the regulations took 3.5 years to draft and finally get approved. And in April of 2025, they were adopted. The effective date of the regulations is March 1st, 2026. That's when the Transfer Act is officially done and the new release-based program starts. Okay, this.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about the differences between the programs beyond this fundamental mechanism of transfer versus release. Can you talk about some other differences in the programs?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the Transfer Act is limited in scope, and it covers establishments. The term establishment and what drives the train for the Transfer Act is not related to any releases. So, I mean, it's totally ineffective in that sense and unfair. The trigger is the transfer of that establishment. Once you are in the program, you're transferring the property. As I said, you have to file a Transfer Act form, conduct site-wide investigation, often to prove a negative, and remediate the property according to the RSR. So the new program is totally different. It really shifts the obligation from property transfers to discoveries of releases, which makes more sense. It's rational. It aligns the cleanup triggers. It aligns the cleanup triggers with the environmental risk. So under the release-based program, there are 2 types of releases. One's called the emergent release. I call it the current release. That's one that happens right in front of you. That still follows the spill regulations and statutes that are already on the books. So nothing really changes there as a practical matter. The second type of release is called, and they call it an existing release, but everybody in the industry calls it an historical release. Those releases are those that have been there for years and have never been remediated. And so the trigger with the new release-based program is the discovery of a release. So how is a release discovered? Well, if you look at the regulations, they say it's when a person who owns or has long-term possession and control of a property obtains knowledge of the release. Okay, that's real helpful. So how do you obtain knowledge? It's someone does a phase 1 or phase 2, and there's sampling results or data that comes in. And that's one way you learn. And then, observation of the conditions. And there's another term now, multiple lines of evidence. And that's kind of subjective. It's that if you know that this property was historically used for industrial, you go out there and you see staining in the back 40 or odors, that may be enough to constitute knowledge. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the future and how strict DEEP is going to be in interpreting that knowledge and ascribing it to the owner of the property. So once you have knowledge, there are reporting requirements, maybe. It depends on, and it varies on the level of risk. If it's a really kind of bad release, it falls in the category of what's called a significant existing release, SER. And SERs are the ones that are like exponentially higher than the state numeric criteria for action. They're the ones that are affecting drinking water sources and, or close to a surface water body. So that's a separate category. And when those happen, you have, depending on the risk, 72 hours to report it. Now if the owner didn't find it, but someone else, they have much less. They're like 12 hours, in some cases 1 hour to report it to the owner. And then the owner has the obligation to report it to Dept. So that's one category. But we'll mostly deal with the other two, which are releases that have greater than 2 times the applicable action criteria under the RSRs. And you have 120 days to report it if you haven't fully remediated by then. And then there's releases below 2 times the criteria. And you have 365 days to report it if you don't fully remediate it. If you fully remediate it, you don't have to report it. So that's good news. If you don't remediate the property in 1 year, which happens quite often and probably will continue to happen because people have to go out and finance it, they got to get an LEP, you're in the queue, it takes a long time. So you go into what's called a tier process. And the new program creates a multi-tier response based on the nature of the contamination, the scope of the contamination. So, for instance, tier 1A, it's the highest risk. And Dept, the commissioner, actually oversees those particular releases. Tier 1B are releases that an LEP can oversee, but they may be close to some sensitive receptors. Tier 3, Tier 2, that was 1B. Tier 2 are controlled risk, not near receptors that LEPs are overseeing. And then the final one is, it's really low level, and through natural attenuation, you'll be able to meet the criteria of the state. So those are the different levels. You're thrown into one of those tiers, and you have different timelines in which to fully comply with the new release-based remediation program. Once you comply, you file, and oh, by the way, the key difference between the Transfer Act and this new program in investigation and remediation is you only have to investigate those releases that you identify and discover. So if you have 100 acres and your releases are only on, you know, a 100-yard area, that's all you have to investigate and remediate, which, you know, in terms of investigating, it's a huge savings. The only problem is if you run into some other releases along the way, that could continue for a while. And so that's the key difference in investigation and remediation. Once you're done, you file a closure report. And then there's an audit process that DPAS, you know, for screening level, I think they have to complete it in 180 days. And, you know, then there's two other levels of reporting. The full audit being the largest. I think they have to initiate it within 180 and complete it in 3 years. I mean, it's a pretty extensive time. So be aware of that. I mean, there's no statutory provision that says they have to give you a no further action letter, but DEP has assured us that you've completed it, and they've reviewed it, and they're not going to audit it. They're going to give you that no further action letter if you ask. There's a general carve out for residential. I mean, there's a lot of exceptions, and I'm not going to get into them now. We don't have time, but generally there are carve outs for residential. Although if there's a leak from an underground storage tank, that still is covered by the underground storage tank statutes and regulations. There's additional carve outs. I mean, these are benefits. They've reduced or made less stringent the cleanup standards for multi-family residences, 4 or more units. And they did that to support, I guess, new housing development. They raised the standards or made them less stringent for passive recreation, which makes sense. So all those things are good. Under the permit by rule program, they allow you to just keep in place some low levels of historic fill and other pollution, and they allow you to, if there's contamination under bituminous concrete, they'll allow you to keep it there. So there's some real pluses and advantages of the program. I just wanted to mention a couple of concerns. This statute that introduced the concept of maintainer. So if you're an owner, a long-term tenant, you may be considered a maintainer. If there's a release, you're a maintainer of that release. If you're a maintainer of the release, you have to comply with the release-based program. So keep that in the back of your mind for a minute. The Act also created an expanded definition of person. It not only covers the limited liability company, the municipality, the corporation, but it says it also includes, and I'll just pull it out here, any member or manager of a limited liability company, or any managing body or officer of any partnership, association, or firm or corporation associated with those entities. So it's statutorily going beyond that corporate entity or LLC entity to the person. And if the person had control over the affairs of that entity, the statute allows them to go right through. Here's the corporate bill. So that's something you have to consider. You no longer can feel comfortable saying, well, I have an LLC or I have a corporation. And that's, people tell you, well, we kind of always had that power, but not really. It's right there now out in the open.
Gary, if I could ask a question. We're all real estate professionals here on the commercial side.
Yeah.
What's the culpability of a real estate agent representing a property and it's not been fully disclosed that there's a leak or an underground storage tank or something like that? What's the culpability for that agent?
Yeah, I don't think that will change. I mean, I think where, you may have your civil actions if because the laws changed, and I'm gonna get into that next question of what due diligence should be done. So you may have some issues there, but in terms of the statute right now and the regulations, I mean, it doesn't create any new responsibility from a regulatory perspective on you. But I will just end by saying that there are criminal and civil penalties associated with non-compliance. And those are between $25,000 and $50,000 a day, up to, depending on what the offense is, and 1 to 3 years in prison. And again, those are like those are the extreme cases, but the penalties are significant. And so a buyer and seller and owner of property have to be very careful about those things.
So as your answer suggests, this new reduced-based program is potentially more fair, but not necessarily less complicated. So we're glad to have somebody like you to guide us through the process as we go through this transaction. Let's change gears a little bit and talk specifically about what we should be looking out for in transactions. Let's talk first about purchases and sales and diligence and contract terms.
Okay. The way I look at this, there are like at least 3 new transactional dynamics, as I would call them. The first is in terms of due diligence. Due diligence is no longer required by statute or regulation, but it's going to be market driven. And you don't, in order to transfer property, you don't have to do all sorts of investigations, but the market will dictate how that's done. Second, a buyer's due diligence can trigger obligations, investigation, remediation, fines obligations for the seller if it's not handled properly. So I give you a scenario. Buyer is doing due diligence, discovers some release areas, and if the buyer tells the seller about those release areas, and even when he's still in his due diligence period, the seller now has knowledge and has an obligation to comply with the release-based cleanup program. So you could have this situation where the buyer discovers these, tells the seller, and for any number of reasons backs out of the deal. So now the seller is holding on to this property. He has these remediation obligations, and it may taint the value of the property as well and make it less marketable. So, which leads me to kind of the third dynamic. Sellers may consider a strategic non-disclosure options. In other words, they may put a provision in a contract that you can disclose, I don't want you to disclose certain releases to me unless you close. And if you close, then I am entitled to all those report and all that data. It's important that the seller ultimately get it because, there might be a dispute afterwards, and that information will serve as a good baseline for the seller and, quite honestly, for the buyer. So there are certain types of disclosures that have to be made. The buyer has one really absolute disclosure requirement. If it's called, as I told you before, an SCR, a significant environmental release, and how he would know, I'm not quite sure, but that the buyer has to disclose that immediately to the seller. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. So, you'd have to craft the language of that non-disclosure to, allow for, required reporting to still occur. And I can see going forward, cash buyers are not planning to build on the site or, disturb the soil. They may do less due diligence, and avoid having the knowledge of releases going forward. Buyers are going to have to coordinate with their lenders more because the lenders are going to have additional requirements for due diligence. The relationship between the buyer, borrower, and the lender is going to become more ongoing, I see it. And I'll get to that in a minute. You know, in terms of contract terms, as I said, I think you'll see the seller wanting to put in a pre-closing remediation clause, you know. There'll be different allocations of obligations. You know, we already allocate risk, and now, and a lot of times it's a question of leverage. But in the past, you know, we were present focused. You know, if you got through the Transfer Act, and it wasn't an establishment, you closed, you weren't really too worried about what would happen. You know, there was no trigger then until the property was sold again. So now there's going to be more of a future concern of what's going on, because you know, if there's a discovery of a release, you know, 5 months from the closing, now the new buyer has to take care of it. So, you know, it raises questions of how they're going to allocate risk. You know, doesn't matter if the release is discovered pre-closing or post-closing. And you know, there is an interesting situation where, under the statute and regulations, any release that's identified as a result of data or reports that were generated prior to the adoption of the regulations, that is not considered a discovery. So all these old files and reports in the file drawer, those are not considered discovery, even if you look at them when you're going to close. So, you know, query, the buyer does its due diligence and, you know, gets a hold of some of these old, you know, environmental reports, and they show a number of releases, right? But those reports are, you know, from 5 years ago, let's say. And now, who's going to be responsible? Is the buyer going to say, well, I want you, seller, to be responsible for cleaning those up? Seller's going to say, look, it's not an actionable item. It's not a trigger, you know? You know, it's carved out. And buyer's going to say, well, if I disturb that soil in the future, and now all of a sudden, you know, I have obvious signs of it being a contaminated release, I got to do something about it. So there's going to be a lot of that back and forth going on. You know, there's going to be new provisions regarding, you know, releases and indemnifications. I would see that, for instance, you know, a seller saying, look, I want to be indemnified, you know, for any of these old identified releases, these cabinet drawer releases that, you know, from old reports. You know, that's your problem. Or, you know, maybe there'll be a provision that if I know you're going to expand or build a new building right after the closing, I may say you have the right and opportunity to go out and investigate that, you know, for as much as you want. But, you know, if you don't do it or you miss something and you go out and build your building and discover releases, you know, I, as a seller, want to be released and indemnified from any action against me on it. There'll be a lot of back and forth on those types of things, you know. You know, escrows. There may be more escrows now, too. And one, there's going to be a larger universe of properties that are covered. So all commercial and industrial properties. So, and then, you know, as I said, under the Transfer Act, you know, people were looking at the present, not necessarily what was going to happen in the future. But now, because there, you know, there's ongoing triggers. Every time you trench for utilities, every time you expand building, and there's, you know, the opportunity for new historic releases to be discovered. So there may be escrows. For instance, if the buyer is definitely going to build a building in a certain spot after the closing, the buyer might want to escrow money and say, you know, you're responsible for any releases, historic releases we uncover, and I'm going to want that money to be put in escrow to cover the costs. So those are the types of, I think, additional terms you're gonna see in contracts and with respect to due diligence.
Aaron, question for you. Does the new act make it simpler to transact or make it more difficult? I mean, we were hoping to get it easier. And Brian Atherton has been our representative at Hartford, Connecticut Association of Realtors.
Yeah.
So he's been watching proceedings and filming us on occasion. But seriously, it looks like it's more complicated, more convoluted.
I think it's more complicated for the lawyers who are crafting these contracts and negotiating.
By design.
Listen, I don't even, the regulations are 350 pages. I don't think anybody has a clear handle on it all yet, but I think it's going to be easier in the sense that there's no statute or regulation that's blocking the closing. There's not going to be the requirement to fill out all these transfer act forms. You don't necessarily have to hire an LEP to fill out the ECAP that has to go with the transfer act forms. So in that sense, it's a lot easier. And it's going to eliminate the unfairness where properties that don't never had a release still have to prove a negative. I think those are all good things. It puts us in a line with 48 other states. So, and that's helpful because a lot of buyers, I've experienced this, come in and all of a sudden you're not dealing with normal rules of engagement. They have to deal with this crazy arcane law called the Transfer Act. And they run to Rhode Island or Massachusetts. So I think it'll be better in that respect, but it does raise, additional challenges to consider. And I'm not saying that those are for the worse, but, we're all gonna have to kind of rethink how we do these transactions. That's
While
my
you're at it,
point.
why don't you
Yeah.
just briefly address what lenders might be considering as they do this?
Okay.
Final question.
Yeah, it's a good segue. I think the lenders, will always have the same goal. I mean, and that's to protect their financial, legal, and reputational, their reputational risk. And that's always been there. It's always going to stay the same. It's just how are they going to do that now? I think there's going to be, revised protocols that lenders are going to have to implement and consider.
So it's possible this may not be effective as of March 1st?
No, it will be. It will be effective. Yeah, so you all better be ready, because here it comes. I do think, however, that because of the release-based program, there's going to be continuing regulatory triggers. It's not just, okay, I closed, we satisfied the Transfer Act, or we're not an establishment. And now as you go forward, there's continuous opportunities for regulatory requirements. As I said before, you trench for utility lines, you discover release, you add an addition. There's a whole host of these additional ways that now the bank has to be thinking about as it underwrites. So that's a continuing risk to the lender, and it impacts the value of their collateral, and it may also impact the ability of the borrower to pay. Now, if all of a sudden the borrower has to do all these, comply with the new remediation cleanup program, and there's a whole series of releases, they get costly, and it's something that the bank is going to have to consider. How is that going to impact the financial health of my borrower? So I think what you're going to see is there's going to be, expanded and more focused investigations and due diligence before closing. I mean, they'll continue to require the phase ones. Phase twos, they'll require, and they might, require additional soil testing, even though it's not in an area considered an area of concern or an REC in the phase one. If they know that you're gonna build some improvement in that area, even though there's no area of concern, they may want you to go out there and test it a little more, just to make sure that, you know, when you're drawing down on the construction loan and you have your contractors lined up, you don't hit the mother load of releases. You know, so I think that might happen, and they also might consider more, you know, what's the intended use of the property? You know, as I said, are they going to have expansions? Are they going to change the use? And there might be more restrictions on changing the use. For instance, you go from a commercial or industrial use to some kind of residential use, the cleanup requirements are going to be a lot more stringent and more expensive. So I think those are the things that the bank's going to look at. I think they're going to implement some mitigation tools, and some of those would be, they may, you know, reduce the loan to value ratios on properties where they know there might be some potential risk as a result of expansion. They may increase the reserves for those reasons. And, you know, there's one that I've never found helpful, but all the experts say, you know, they may use pollution liability insurance. You know, and then I know that there's a place for that, but you know, I've generally found it expensive and you know, it's narrow in coverage. And they may also require their appraisals to reflect these new risks, environmental risks that are associated with the program. So they'll probably have additional covenants and representations in their loan documents, you know, representations that they, you know, the borough knows of no historical releases, that, you know, the seller hasn't identified any historical releases, that, you know, the borough will immediately notify the bank if any are discovered, and, you know, and they'll comply with the new release-based programs and its terms. There might be covenants that, as I said, requiring prompt disclosure, compliance with the new program, submittal of annual certifications, and, you know, no releases are found in, and maybe just a very robust covenant that allows the lender to come in post-closing anytime to do additional environmental inspections and testing.
Gary, do you have more to your presentation? Because I'd like to make some time for Q&A.
I got less than 5 minutes, 2 minutes, so I'll make it. And one of the big concerns, obviously, for lenders is if they have to foreclose on the property. And under the statute, there was no carve-out for lenders. You know, lenders were considered maintainers. If they foreclosed, they owned the property, and therefore, if there were leases, they were a maintainer of a lease. And it's not a position the bank wants to get into. So in the regulations, the working group recommended, and it's in there, that as long as a lender meets, we do have a lender liability statute for other things, that a lender will not be considered a maintainer if they comply with the lender liability statute. So that's a good thing. I mean, the downside with that is that you know, you have to be careful, because one of the requirements is you can't manage the property. Yeah, I think that's easy, but you have to sell the property at the earliest practicable and commercially reasonable time on commercially reasonable terms. And that may be difficult if all of a sudden there's a discovery of all these releases. And the issue is, at what point do you become a maintainer? Because Dept considers you not to, you know, sold the property at the earliest practicable time. The things that you can do to avoid that, I think, is, you know, before you foreclose, you'll want to investigate the property. You want to do your own sampling. Because if you find out that there's all these releases that you may say it's not worth owning it because the cost to comply may be greater than the property itself. And finally, document all your steps taken to try and sell the property. I think if you have a strong file, it'll be very difficult for a Deep or anyone to suggest that you weren't trying reasonably to market that property. All right?
Questions?
Gary, thank you so much for that presentation. Questions?
So it feels like the lending of the money is really the trigger for identifying releases in a property. Just the lender's going to push that forward. In a situation where somebody is rich in equity and purchases it all cash, would that trigger any sort of release-based cleanup system? Do they just go into being a maintainer and don't identify? And then just tangentially to that, would the information in the phase 1 historical report count as attainment of knowledge?
I'll answer. The first question is that if a buyer buys in cash, and assuming a reasonably sophisticated buyer and decides to do that, doesn't have any knowledge of any releases, it closes, there's nothing that buyer has to do until he or she discovers a release. Okay? If the buyer identifies some bona fide releases and buys the property, the clock starts the date that buyer closes, and the buyer will be responsible for complying with the release-based cleanup program. And your second question was?
Does the
Phase 1?
Yeah, does that count as attainment of knowledge, or does it have to be a phase 2?
The phase 1s, unless they it's interesting because they'll identify maybe old reports, and that data is exempt, In a phase 1, there's usually no testing done. It's just, okay, we think these are areas of concern or RECs. In my opinion, it doesn't raise to the level of knowledge, It's when you do the phase 2 and you get actual hard data. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deb.
Yes, Deb.
I'm a lender, so
Yeah.
my question to you, one, is there a grandfather process whereby if we execute a deal, right, a buyer is buying a property on January 1, say, and the deal does not close by March 1st, do they have to start the process all over again on March 1st to file all the new paperwork?
Well, there's no new paperwork that will have to be filed, but you will be subject to the new release-based cleanup program. You close after March 1st or after you're subject to the program. You'll no longer be in the transfer act. So don't bother completing those forms.
Okay, and then what if the contamination is under the foundation of an existing property? How is that handled under the new process?
The actual remedial options aren't changing. In fact, there's more of them under the program, so that's a real good thing. It depends on what the contaminant is. If it's metals or something that doesn't have vapor gas, you can isolate them under the building, just like we've been doing for the past 20 years.
Right, but say you've got an industrial property and, it's 100,000 square feet and you decide to sell that property to Walmart.
Right.
Just as a for instance. Does that then, if it's under this foundation of the property, that environmental issue, how does that affect in the Transfer Act?
Well, in the Transfer Act, if you were an establishment, you'd have the obligation to investigate the whole site and remediate it. If one of the options, depending on the type of contamination and the level of concentration. An option is just to keep it there, isolated under the building, and then file what's called an ELUR on the land records and say that, you know, you can't disturb this, and that building has to stay there. That's the same option that'll be available in the release-based cleanup program too.
And is there anything, is Deep making a commitment, because a lot of times we're stalled in closing on a property, say they had an underground storage tank, right? They removed the underground storage tank, they tested the soil, it's all good. But then we need the tank closure report from Deep in order to proceed with closing. It is Deep now, I mean, because they'll string it out for months, years. I mean, there's nothing in their work agreement that says they have to provide the borrower or the acquirer of that property the tank closure report in a timely fashion.
Debbie,
Yeah.
that's when you hire an attorney.
It doesn't always help.
Yeah.
It doesn't always help.
I can tell you this, and I don't know if all of you agree or be happy with me saying it, but I have found the people I've dealt with at Deep are really bright, really hardworking, and want to do the right thing. Now, what they think is the right thing and I do may not necessarily be the same at all times, but I do have a lot of respect for them. I think the $1 million question here is, will they have enough staff to do it? You know, the members of the working group have asked that question and have been repeatedly assured that there will be to do it. You know, I deal with the Deep staff a lot on brownfield projects and DECD, and I can tell you it's been seamless, you know? I mean, there have been challenges, but those people have always stepped up to do what I needed. And let's hope that with this new program, they got the staff to do it.
Great, thank you.
Gary, thank you so much. You're very informative. You have so much good information to share with us. So, do we have your contact info? Do you have business cards? So you can,
I will,
reach you?
yeah, it's Gary O'Connor, G. O'Connor at Pullcom, PULLCOM as in Mary.com. And you know, I invite you to give me a call if you have a question or email me and I'll get back to you. I'm happy the same day.
And any of your guys that are here, the lawyers, thank you for coming, you guys.
Thank you for
Thank
hosting
you.
as well.
All right,
Okay.
Thank
it's
you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you. We have more. There will be no meeting, no FCCBN meeting in November, and it starts at 8 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, the 19th. Did I get that right, Rick?
Yeah, they're gonna go over all the differences on your tax bill for 25 versus 24. They did this the first time Trump passed the tax bill. We got a huge turnout. There's a lot of deductions you can still take, still got time to take it.
Okay. And sign up, please. Sign up will be through you, Rick.
John at M&T Bank, who's sponsoring this.
We'll send out an email to everybody in the FCCBN office. I'm sorry?
Do you know where in Monroe?
Yes, at the golf club. The golf club in Monroe. You'll get emails. All right, we've been there before. It's very nice. All right, so, on to our meeting. How many people are here for the first time, their first FCCBN meeting? Like to just stand up and just say your name. Sir? Welcome. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Tara Kelly, I'm a commercial lender with Ives Bank.
Great.
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, who else is here for the first
Lisa
time?
Limited, Webster Bank Business Relations Manager.
Great, wonderful. Anybody else? Yes.
Dan Lisa with Preferred Building Services. We provide that building service for commercial real estate.
Great, welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Bob Panetto from TD Bank, commercial lender.
Great, well represented. Go ahead.
I'm just doing major with Sirhan.
Well, anybody else? No? Terrific. Who has closed the deal since our last meeting that they'd like to share with us? Anybody? Yes.
I do have one. 5 Cross Street in Norwalk. First of all, Brian Clark Jr. with Regal Real Estate. Closed industrial property. Phase 1 was fine. It's closed at 712,500. Actually appraised higher than what we closed at. The appraiser was like, no problem. So, in and out.
Very good, Brian, thank you. Yes.
Well, just as a tribute to Gary, who was.
Stand up, sir.
So Gary and I worked on a deal at 1050 Buckingham in Watertown, 5.2 million. It was a former Crystal Rock water facility. And Gary was instrumental in getting that over the finish line. So thank you, Gary.
Great, great. Anybody else with a deal they'd like to share? Close recent, yes. Judy?
Hi, yeah, Judy Dominguez with Web Realty Company. We closed on the 3 residential lots that we had. I don't know if you remember, I was trying to get it here, ended up being a dual agency, and it's finally closed. Yeah, by the water in Norwalk. Asking price, which I'm happy, and the client is happy too. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
EAC Properties, and I'm back certainly today, so I'm not going to stand up. But 91 Main Street, Nyack, that was a 3-story retail building, 8,168 square feet. We sold it at auction for $650,000. We are adaptively converting it to mixed use. First floor retail, need help leasing up to a restaurant. Apartments above with water views. 1108 Albany Ave, Hartford, multifamily building, $360,000, as well as a lease on the second floor, 95 Reef Road. And I hope I don't butcher this. Ifcor Galbraiths is a ship broker, $33 a square foot for 1,091 square feet. And tomorrow we can announce 3 more, but not today. That's all I got.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Last call. You listening? Anyone? Yes. Judy.
All right, it's not on the MLS yet, so hopefully we can do it off market. It is on 211 Buchanan Avenue. It's retail. It's the last one on the plaza. It is 28 triple net. That's 3,500. I'm sorry, not triple net, just utility. So it's 3,500 plus just electric. It is brand new, all renovated. The landlord does not want a kitchen, so anything but a commercial kitchen. And speaking of commercial kitchens, I have another listing coming on the MLS too. 4,500 a month. It is ideal. It's inside a building. It's 1,000 square feet commercial industrial kitchen. Ideally for a ghost kitchen. Call it Grubhub, DoorDash, that kind of thing. So Judy Dominguez, Web Realty Company. Thank you very much.
Properties, new listing, 2391 South Main Street, Waterbury, industrial building, 10,000 square foot, give or take, looking for $14 to $18 a square foot, depending on quality of tenants. Also for sale, a mold fire water remediation company. We're looking for $1 million at a 2.5 times multiple. We've got 4 dry cleaners, 1 service station, and 3 pickup drop-off locations, also at a 2.5 times multiple. Talk to me further on that, and a few others, but again, it's Friday, I'm tired, it's great to see everyone. So, thanks.
Anybody else with a new listing? Okay, how about, seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry. Rob? You got something?
You want a capital market update?
That's what I come
Sure.
here for.
What are we more than that?
What was that?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rob Nolbecken, Azimuth Advisors here in Westport, commercial real estate debt advisor. So since our last meeting, a lot has gone on in the market. Wall Street tends to get ahead of themselves in terms of the stock market and the bond market. Everyone was 100% confident there would be the 25 basis point federal funds rate cut on Wednesday of this week. But what Wall Street was looking for was the tea leaves and the telltales. They want to know what's going to happen in December. Will the Fed cut rates again for a 3rd time this year? and they weren't happy with the response, and you saw a little bit of a pullback in the stock market, and bond rates went up a little because Wall Street is always oversold, overbought. They get ahead of themselves. So the good news is the Fed is easing quantitative tightening. What has happened since COVID, they put liquidity in the market to get us out of the COVID period. They bought securities, mortgage-backed securities, treasuries. There's two ways the Fed can control inflation, which is one, obviously the Fed funds rate and moving that up higher, and two, it's how much money is in circulation in the system. And how many people in the past 4 years did a deal and the bank wouldn't make a loan because A, they didn't have deposits, or they required an half or an equal amount of the loan to lend you back your money. It's because the Fed took liquidity out of the market, and there was less money to lend, and that was helping put inflation. So easing quantitative tightening, what's been happening is the Fed's got a $9.5–10 trillion portfolio. As securities matured, they retired, and that's it. They didn't keep money in the system. It just evaporated. So quantitative easing of quantitative tightening, and you see that in the newspaper, means when the securities mature, now they're going to buy more securities, because when they reviewed the banks, a lot of banks did not have a requisite or appropriate amount of reserves. So that's what's happening is they're balancing all these things. Our prediction in the long run, I don't know what's going to happen in the December meeting. Powell is short-lived. I've seen he could be out as early as March 2026. His official term is over in May of 26 with a 2-year renewal option if he's requested. We'll have a new Fed. It's going to take another 6 months before we really start seeing interest rates really helping push deals along. It's gonna be another quarter, 2 quarters. And the fact that the government's been shut down, we don't have data because the Department of Statistics that's producing all the data is closed. So, but it will all change very shortly. Next Tuesday, we'll figure it all out when the elections are done.
Thank you, Rob. Well done. They need help with they've got a requirement for 2,500 square feet, for example. They can't find it anywhere nearby. Can anybody help with that? Just an example. Yes, just your name.
I have a hi, Viola with Higgins Group Real Estate. So I have an out-of-state client that's looking to open up a Starbucks, maybe multiple locations. The main concern is that we would like to be close to highways, so easy on and off exits. And I haven't seen many. The lease price is not a problem. We're open to anything that's available as long as it's within market value and the property justifies the price. So we're available to go anytime. And if anybody has any spaces available or anything coming on, please let me know. I have my cards here with me, and I'll provide my contact information.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, in the back. Hand up.
Sure. I represent Enterprise Car Rental. I need hopefully something that resembles 2,000 square feet and 40-car parking in Ossining, and I need that in White Plains too. So.
Okay. Very good. Yes. Anybody else?
Okay. Andrea with Car. I have a periodontist looking for 1,500 to 2,000 square feet in Shelton. I have another dentist looking for Hartford County suburbs, 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. I have a dentist looking to purchase on the border of Darien, Stamford, either purchase a building, a suite, or to lease out. The leases are always 10 years plus 2.5. Then I have a plastic surgeon looking for Pound Ridge, New York. And if anyone comes up with any dental offices that are empty, I'd be happy to find you clients. Thank you.
Thank you. So you bring cards?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so, thank you. Anybody else?
Good afternoon. Hopefully everybody's warm. With that being said, I'm going to work backwards on my list here. I have a client, 40 plus residential units looking for. Ideally, he wants them in bad shape. So we'll start there. That's all of Connecticut. He's okay with that. I have another client, industrial space, looking to lease 1,800 to 2,500 square feet. Needs a garage door to pull on a work van. It's a power washing company. So he needs a storage and for the van. Next is an auto repair location. Again, obviously needs to have a garage door. He's willing to outfit, put in a lift, not necessarily a hydraulic into the ground, but above is fine. Actually, 2 laundromat situations. One is all of Connecticut. They're fine to purchase. Second laundromat would be lower Fairfield County only. Lastly, liquor store. Ideally, we're looking at Stanford because they have the most license open right now. We've approached Subways to actually buy them out. That haven't happened. They would consider Westport and Fairfield because they have the most licenses as well opened currently. Norwalk fluctuates per week, but that's what I got.
Brian,
Happy Halloween.
Yes, investor also looking for mixed use. If it's vacant, fine, but they want the tenants in place. If it needs work, that's fine too. I'll just need, like I said, it just needs the numbers to work for them. That's it. Bridgeport, Stratford, Stamford, those kind of areas. They're up to 5 million, so we can buy multiple. I'm really looking. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Judith.
It's Darren Buer. I've been here before, met many of you, and have been working on 1031 exchanges. And today is Happy 1031 Exchange Day. So when you have clients that are not meeting quite their number in terms of their transactions, we offer a great solution. We partner with advisors and commercial real estate brokers looking for solutions on those amounts that just don't quite fit into the transactions. So with Blue Rock, we've been around for 20 years. We specialize in 1031 exchange, DSTs, and 721 programs. I think what's really important right now is finding people solutions to their problems. And I partner with CPAs, and we work on Schedule E income strategies to find you new clients so that you can conduct these transactions. I've talked to the people at my table, and I'm looking forward to working with others in the area to help you solve those problems for your clients. And we'll get together in the corner. We talked last time I was here. So thank you so much, and happy 1031 Exchange Day.
All right. Thank you.
My name is Vera Maxman. I have clients that are looking for a spa type of facility, heavy traffic like a downtown Stanford, Darien prefer. But they're looking anywhere from about 1,500 square feet to 2,000 square feet. So if anybody know of anything, let me know, please. Vera Maxman. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Anybody just get a reaction to what we're seeing in the business world? What's the general mood out there? I mean, yesterday we saw the reduction in interest rates. That triggered the phones to ring last time the interest rates beat down. I suspect we're going to see more phones ringing shortly. What's your take on things? Anybody? Brian.
Another interesting, along with the interest rates, not only, we're going to probably see another influx about New York buyers from the residential side. And that has to do with politics, but I will leave that for another conversation for another day. But so if you also do residential, look for that New York influx back into Connecticut. And again, our inventory is so low on the residential side. Let's have fun with that too. So that's all I got.
What's your feeling about next year? Next year's business climate. We're going to hear from our experts in that next month. But what's your feeling? Where are we going? John Trainer will be talking about that, I'm sure.
Depends on who wins.
But what's the feeling? I'm sorry?
Depends on who wins in New York. If Cuomo
Really?
wins, I don't think New Yorkers will be moving. If he doesn't, then we're gonna see it.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a yes?
My business clients are really just holding waiting for interest rates to drop further. So
Further-
they're all,
further than
yeah.
that half point so
They-
far.
They're not happy with a half point, especially when they're talking about maybe 2 to 3 more rate cuts next year.
Right.
So everybody's holding on to their real estate, waiting for that drop to happen.
Okay.
So that they could try to
Alright,
sell
thank you.
or just refinance.
Okay. And who is using AI? Is everybody at this point basically familiar with it, using it? Everybody? AI? Okay, see a lot of heads nodding. Yes. Okay, good. Okay. I'd like to say thanks to Pullman and Comley for today's. Oh, I'm sorry.
And I apologize if I missed it. I just got an important email I had to respond to, so I apologize if I missed it. But I do have 3 listings, brand new on the market. They're for lease. 2 of them are on the same building, first floor, and they're separated currently, but the landlord is willing to open up and lease as one tenant on the first floor. So it is on Long Ridge Road, North Stamford. One of the spaces is 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 square feet. The other one is 1,475. And they can be combined for a total of about 3,500 square feet. Retail, medical use, and what else can go in there?
A dentist.
Right, medical. Okay, Rob.
Dessert is served, as you can see. Okay. We are actively looking